Graham is one of the most spectacularly successful playwrights of the last decade. His play from 2012, This House, was about how the Whip's office kept the Labour government of the late 1970s going despite a wafer-thin majority. And that might sound dry as dust, but in fact it was surprisingly hugely enjoyable, completely gripping, absurdly funny, and it transferred from the Cottesloe to the Olivier at the National Theatre, and then into the West End twice, I think. Ink in 2017 is about Rupert Murdoch's takeover and transformation of the Sun newspaper, which opened at the Almeida in a super soaraway production by Rupert Gould, and sure enough, it too went into the West End. Labour of Love in the same year, a technically dazzling and beautifully touching play about the recent history of the Labour Party, but which was also a kind of slow burning romance, cut out the middleman by opening in the West End at the Noel Coward Theatre, where a year later, Quiz, his play about the so-called coughing major scandal of 2001 and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, transferred, leading some people to wonder if St Martin's Lane might soon be renamed James Graham Boulevard. In the meantime, he's also made a huge impact on TV with television plays about contemporary politics. That included Coalition in 2015, which dramatised the negotiations between the Tories and the Lib Dems in 2010 that produced the coalition government that we all remember so fondly. His television play was hugely enjoyable and featured an outrageously delightful performance by Mark Gatiss as Peter Mandelson. So if you can track it down, it's worth watching for that alone. Then there was the Brexit Beyond Civil War in 2019, which starred Dominic Cumberbatch as Dominic Cummings, the architect, of course, of the Leave campaign, which was a drama, I think, that did more to bring Cummings to public scrutiny than actually anything that happened in the referendum campaign. And this week, the week which I'm recording this, saw Quiz on ITV, his own adaptation of that stage play. It had, of course, an almost literally captive audience, but it brought people together in their respective homes in a moment of kind of whole family live television, in a moment, I hope I'm not overstating this, of genuinely shared collective focus, I think. But, James Graham is very good at that. The reason that these shows have been flying so regularly into the West End is because he has a remarkable ability, I think, to find stories that tap into broad public curiosity, anxiety, and debate. And he does so by marrying a journalistic precision and even-handedness with a flamboyant theatricality and a variety of elegant dramaturgical structures. In particular, I want to ask him about this. He uses the traditional structure of a play in two halves divided by an interval in a really sophisticated way, I think, to pit ideas against each other. So in Labour of Love, we watch a 25-year story chronologically backwards in the first act, where it seems to mean one thing, and then we watch it forwards in the second act, and we realise everything was not as it seemed. In The Angry Brigade, his play about the British early 70s urban terrorist group, one half is told from the perspective of the police and the other from the brigade itself. In the police side, order dissolves into anarchy, while when we're with the brigade, anarchy is threatened as traditional structures, particularly gender relations and things, start to assert themselves. In Quiz, on stage anyway, the first half tells us why Charles Ingram was guilty, and the second half persuades us of his innocence. And in Ink, a play that I'll be talking to James about in a little more detail, the first half does the near impossible, persuades a leftish London theatre audience to cheer for Rupert Murdoch, before the second half forensically tears him apart. As a shorthand, it's easy to describe James Graham as the playwright of contemporary political and public history. And though true to some extent, it's misleading in two ways, I think. One is that he's written other plays that don't meet that description, but shouldn't be overlooked, I think. A decade ago, The Whiskey Taster, for example, is set in an advertising company's offices and concerns an attempt to brand an alcoholic drink. And though there are satirical ideas and the kind of generational analysis that we might associate with James's work, at its heart is a lyrical evocation of the mysterious magnificence of whiskey that moves almost metaphysically beyond politics and culture. And second, even in the big public plays, he's not just telling us about the recent history of the Labour Party or the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire scandal. He's talking about love and desire, about truth and longing. Ink is a kind of retelling of the Faust story in some ways. Monster Raving Loony from 2016 is about the theatricality of political life. And all the plays, from Quiz to The Vote, from The Whiskey Taster to Monster Raving Loony, are all about Englishness, demographically, emotionally, culturally, as well as politically. James Graham is a wonderful writer, and I think we're very lucky to have him. And I'm very lucky to be able to talk to him today. James Graham, hello.
Morning, how you doing?
Not bad. How is lockdown for you?
Yeah, it's okay at the moment. And like a lot of people have been saying, I feel I've had to let go of the shame and the guilt of those first couple of weeks where I just really couldn't do anything. Turns out you would think, yeah, you would just think you would be so productive just being on your own and your diary completely clearing. But I guess global pandemics are quite distracting, and I just couldn't. I don't know about you. I just couldn't settle into any sort of rhythm, like my sleep. I just couldn't go to bed and wake up at the same time, and it just. But that's settling, I think.
Yeah, and we weirdly, given that we're on a Zoom call, we live like 3 minutes away from each other. And what I'm missing is the local area's coffee. I haven't had a really great cup of coffee for a month.
No, this is actually instant coffee for the first time. I couldn't actually, my shop didn't have any the posh stuff. No, it's nice. It's always nice to see when we bump into each other going to the shops. You're normally carrying a child, and I'm normally carrying a bottle of wine. Very different. I was down. It's fine.
Of course, most of the writers I've been speaking to on this series have had work curtailed or cancelled or postponed or whatever it is. You're in the quite unusual position that you've actually had some work on this week, because your television adaptation of the stage play Quiz was on TV Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week. How did that go?
Thanks. It went really well, actually. I feel really well. It's just a privilege, isn't it? It's a privilege in a moment when all work is being postponed or cancelled, to be able to share something. Even though it was a very weird way of sharing something, I was on my own with a glass of wine and the juxtaposition of feeling like there's a conversation happening about it.
Yes.
Somewhere out there, but you are so removed from it. But no, it was such a thrill. It was, I mean, a lot of it was a complete accident, and the circumstances in which it's being broadcast are obviously incredibly crazy and tragic. But it accidentally made it into a meta thing, which is we always wanted to create something that felt in tone and style and form, something that felt like the golden age of event television that it was depicting, when people would gather around and watch the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
And we deliberately got ITV kindly to structure it on consecutive nights, like they used to do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And by, as I say, by complete accident, nothing to do with me, it became strangely the thing that it represented, which is sort of it felt like watching TV on Easter Bank Holiday Monday, like it used to in the day when you would watch it with. It was so nice. The most gratifying thing was anecdotally seeing people tweet and talk about it being the first time in a long time they'd watched a TV drama with their kids in the same room in the age of multiple devices, and watching it like they would have watched TV 20 years ago in the time the show was depicted. So all that's just it's just very satisfying. And I say nothing to do with me, but it's a nice feeling.
I saw it when it came into the West End from Chichester, right? Yeah. And I thought it was great and really enjoyed it. It did feel to me like it had come home seeing it on TV, which is not to say anything wrong about the play, but it felt like that's the right way to tell this story, the right medium, the right form. What were your feelings about the move from stage to TV?
I felt, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's television about television. Sometimes that can be death, like theatre about theatre. It's the last thing anybody wants to see. I really loved the stage play. It was commissioned by William Village, who runs Regent's Park Theatre. It was directed by Daniel Evans, and you're right, it was a different proposition because it's theatre, so it's live. So and it's about game shows. So I couldn't imagine for a second not having people hundreds of people in a theatre in a play about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and not asking the audience. So we gave them all devices, and we gave them the 50-50 innocent or guilty, which they voted on. We got people up on stage to play Bullseye and Price is Right. I'm making it sound terrible, I know, but it was, it's live, and we mixed the courtroom with the quiz room, so there was this overlapping thing with TV. TV's all about narrative. TV's about plot, and it. So I've not been great, to be honest, at sometimes adapting my stuff from stage to the screen. I found it incredibly hard, and I can see why you would give it sometimes to a different writer, because I'm trying to adapt Ink into a screenplay at the moment. This play we did at the Almeida, and I found it really hard. You find yourself looking at the scene, you go, well, I just think that's fine. I agreed with that when I wrote it 2 years ago, and I agree with it now. But so you start finding yourself like just setting scenes outside, or putting people on a bike for no reason. You think that doesn't feel like screenwriting. That just feels like you're putting stuff outside, James. But with Quiz, it was different because it's so plotty, and the joy of it, I think, is its story. So just embracing that and finding the form of a heist movie and just like running with it.
And I thought, in particular, the kind of the shadowy syndicate that kind of we build up a lot in the first episode, who kind of wonderfully take themselves quite seriously. And is it Paddy Cooper? Is that the character's name?
Much better name than that. Paddy Spooner.
Paddy Spooner, that's right. Yeah. That was just a wonderful thing that really felt like a real step on for the script.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I've actually just realized I've got my filter on my face. I did this last night for a quiz. We all put these glossy filters on. I'm actually not as beautifully skinned as I am in order to fess up in a drama about truth and reality. I'm very aware that I've got.
I didn't know you could do that in Zoom.
Yeah, you go to Zoom on next to your Apple symbol if it's a Mac, and you can do all kinds of things. So we were playing around. Anyway, yes.
The main thing is that because I'm concerned that this video series is going to end up being an unfolding documentary of the uncontrolled growth of my hair. So if there's a way I can just make it look a bit like I've trimmed, that would be wonderful. Sorry, you were going to say.
The Syndicate. Yeah, so I'm glad you enjoyed that. That was they were in the play, but with the work, I guess. I think you always have to ask the question: what can television do that theatre can't? So, what do I want to lean into more on the TV thing? And the Syndicate, as a group of people, I found it just a joyful prospect to be able to go and see them, to go with the lens to their little English villages in Wiltshire and this English idyll, and see these middle-class professionals, all white and middle-aged, middle-class. Middle England people in their pub gardens on their benches with encyclopedias trying to plot a criminal heist. So yeah, I would be. It was based on a book. It started by being based on a book, and then we went off and did our own research. And incredibly, because the joy of the theatre play was that the real life characters in it will come and see it, and then we get to meet them. So then you get, for the TV drama, you get a whole new wave of research because you've got their phone number and you ring them. And one of the most extraordinary things, again, it's not really to do with me, was that the character of Paul Smith, who was one of the creators of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, played by Mark Bonner in the TV show, Greg Haste on stage, he saw the play and was quite helpful with us all the time with it. And it reignited his curiosity about this whole story and his own certainties about what he thought happened. So completely on his own, he went on his own private investigation trip to go and meet members of the syndicate. He just couldn't get it out of his head, and he wanted to go and meet and ask them, how successful were you in penetrating my show? It's kind of like a weird thing where the telling of the story starts to become the story. So we connected him with Paddy, and he went and offered him complete immunity, like legal immunity, to tell him whatever he wanted to say. He just said, I just need to know how successful you were. So there's a scene in episode 3 where they meet in the pub. That only happened 2.5 months ago, when we were 2.5 months before we were shooting. And then we put it in the script, and that's where the creator of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire discovered. The Paddy admitted that there were hundreds of them. They got into the chair, and they took, of the £50 million that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire gave away in the UK, the syndicate took 5 million of it. And Paul didn't, he just couldn't believe it. So it's, and you know, as a writer, you find these little bizarre, eccentric, idiosyncratic worlds, and they're just a joy. But also, apart from I am a massive tart for entertainment. I didn't grow up with theatre. I grew up with television, and I'm very romantic about television. And I sort of I don't mind being keen on entertaining people, however that means, and them enjoying themselves. And you look at worlds like that and you think that's an absolute delight. And on a slightly higher brow note, I also think it must say something. It must say something about us, the British, Englishness in particular, our obsessiveness sometimes at what it is about quizzes or about. And I think it definitely says something about class. It says a huge thing about class.
Well, I couldn't help feel as I was watching it that in part it's a story about discontented Middle England who sense that they are looked down upon by the metropolitan elites, and so mount this sort of escapade to try and kind of enter and break the system. And it reminds me of something, I can't think what, but you know, it's got that kind of, you know, it felt like it isn't just a story about something that happened kind of 17 years ago, 18, 19 years ago. It feels like it's still telling us something about the weird shifting allegiances and fault lines in Britain. Not to put that too pompously, but do you know what I mean?
Go ahead. I mean, I'll admit it's a piece of light entertainment about light entertainment, but I always wanted to try and embed delicately for an ITV audience some of that stuff into it. For me, it's about also about truth. Obviously, it's a game show. There's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and that feels very old-fashioned now. But I started writing this in, I think, 2016, and obviously alternative facts, post-truth, Donald Trump referendum was all in my head. And again, you can be way too pompous, and I can definitely overstate this, but there is something about what was going on at that time in 2001, 2003. Obviously, the amazing, shocking fact that this happened the day before 9/11, and then the trial by media was happening against the backdrop of all that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that at that time, the emergence of a reality, so-called reality television, that would eventually morph into constructed reality, which is a kind of terrifying phrase. It's just accepted in the industry I think there's a BAFTA category now called constructed reality. But that was emerging, and of course, the very first fictional character to emerge in that format was Donald Trump. When Mark Burnett, who's an English producer who came from the culture of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, went over to America and created The Apprentice. And you can draw a pompous, but I think significant line from this world, the trial of this major and the emergence of reality television and justice as entertainment. You can draw that to the reality television show we're now all living in with a fictional character in the White House.
That's amazing. That is fascinating. I mean, thinking about going back to the lockdown, actually, I kind of always think with you, because you have quite a unusually recognizable area of things you often write about, i.e., sort of recent and contemporary political public history, you must get people all the time saying, "Oh, but you're going to write about this or whatever." So I'm going to do that, which is, is there, of course,
the cab driver for us just a second.
So are you? There must be a bit of you kind of thinking about the lockdown and this current crisis and thinking, how would you turn this? How would you dramatize something like this? I mean, partly because what's interesting, of course, is there's loads of things that work against it dramatically. People can't meet. People are trapped quite statically in their houses. Was there a moment when Boris Johnson went into hospital and you kind of went, "Oh, interesting"?
Finally, way in. No, I definitely didn't. I agree with you that it doesn't really instantly have all of the pieces of the puzzle that you would normally need. There's also, you might disagree with this, there's also no human, it wasn't caused by people. There are human, there are human actions in it, like the behaviour of a government that impacts upon the ability for us to survive this. Well, I don't know. I think great drama about great recent events is normally satisfying because you're watching people make a decision and there are consequences to those decisions, and it says something about human nature and what we do and why we do it to each other. I think a virus as being your antagonist is quite a tough thing. And whether or not there is any appetite from an audience to relive this once we're finally out of it. I think the most interesting thing is how will future plays and dramas absorb it, acknowledge that it happened. It will have to be there. The characters that you're writing in 2022 will have had to have lived through this.
Yeah.
And it's there in the room, in every room that we ever write, ever again, that we lived through this. So that's interesting. But I suppose I do... I hope it's not like a gimmick or a trope. I'm conscious of the fact that whenever I try and tackle a real life subject, I deliberately try to resist the center of it. So resist the Prime Minister and go for the whips, or the Brexit film I did with Benedict Cumberbatch. It didn't feel right to have David Cameron as the main character for loads of reasons, obviously. Like, who cares? But so to go to the people that you've never heard of, who actually did make all those decisions. Dominic Cummings did come up with all that slogan, and I think that slogan won the referendum. I think that's it. I think of it as reversing in through the back door of history and trying to show a different point of view in it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I wanted to ask you actually about where your plays start. This is a slightly different question from the way I would ask most people, because in some ways the sort of subject matter is quite apparent. It's not cryptic, sort of where Ink started or where Quiz started, because they sort of start with Rupert Murdoch and the Sun, or they start with the coughing major, and so on. But there must be a point where you're kind of thinking, yeah, it'd be really interesting to do a play about this, but there must be a point where you go, and now I think I can see how I can write a play about this. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's all true, but I would substitute your how for a why. So you go, oh, that's there's a huge amount of luck, because you can't decide to go and find a brilliant story. You just find it accidentally, probably looking for a different story. I found the story of this house, the story of the whips, and the fact that it was only one member who couldn't arrive for the vote of no confidence because he was ill. That meant that the Labour government fell and then Margaret Thatcher came to power. And you go, well, who's that one member? And wait a minute, what kind of system is vulnerable enough to pivot and change based on someone's ability to get into a room or not? So I learned, you discover that the story around Rupert Murdoch and the Sun, and this year where he set this mission to his editor Larry Lamb to beat the Mirror in sales figures, and they had the most extraordinary rise. And then it was the page 3 girl what done it on the anniversary of the task. You just think that's an amazing story. It's the why. You go, what fine in and of itself that might be interesting to watch, but what's it saying? What's the proposition to the audience? Why sit through this? And that you can do. I think that just that just requires a bit of time. You have to think, what do I feel about it? What do I think this is saying about Britishness? I think the Britishness thing, I don't know why, but I'm very aware that none of my plays are going or will ever go on in Germany, because I'm talking about English people trying to steal £1 million of encyclopedias, or I'm talking about a newspaper they've never heard of. But I'm fascinated by what it is to be British, and either lamenting or in some ways celebrating the strangeness of it, and this old thing with all of these old habits and these old rituals. So there's something about what I was just with the Sun newspaper. You go, well, okay, so why is it the most popular in the country? I don't read it. Probably the theatre audience doesn't read it. You probably don't read it, but it's the most popular. Why? What's its appeal? What does it say about who we are? What does it say about our systems of power and what our structures that Rupert Murdoch can so quickly subvert them and it influence them? It's those questions, I think.
That's great. So I'm trying to kind of think whether there is a typical process for the development of one of your plays. You have a kind of subject matter. A moment that unlocks that for you is when you think, and why tell this story now? And that presumably is a sort of a gear up when you answer that question.
Yes.
And then what are the kind of, if there are typical next stages? I mean, maybe there aren't, but at what point do you start getting a theatrical shape for the play, for example?
Yes. Yeah. I think it probably is different for everyone. I think I definitely after getting the why, I think I try and consciously ask, what's it going to feel like? That's maybe a tonal thing, but like the Millionaire thing we talked about earlier, I said, well, I think it probably should feel like one of those shows from those times, a classic ITV drama, and acknowledge it to the audience, kind of wink and go, here's a courtroom scene, isn't it all ITV? With ink, consciously trying to feel like I want it to feel like a tabloid newspaper. I want it to feel like that sensation of turning the pages and getting more and more, and it'd be brash and it'd be loud and it'd be punky and it'd be cheeky and dirty. So you feel that, and then it's structure, I think, and because I'm very aware in this post-narrative theatre culture that we have and that I love and that I celebrate, and it's plays I want to go and see. I'm a narrative writer. I love narrative, and I love putting it on stage. And I think that's the way I might, not necessarily always successfully, but that's the way I might get away with asking those questions of our institutions or Britishness, because I'm trying to also tell a story that an audience might enjoy sitting through, and then tolerate me lecturing them about class or something. So I find that process, I don't know about you, but I love the bit. One of the things I sometimes do is when I'm working out structure, because you have all these events, you have a year in the life of the Sun. You have that meeting in the restaurant, and you have always hiring that person. Then you have the decision to go to steal all of the ideas from the Mirror, and then the realization that we can't do that. We need to find our own voice, and then the lighting upon the formula of giving people what they want. What do people want? Sod it. They want crime stories. They want tits. They want what it is. So you have all these pieces, but you go in and of itself, that doesn't mean anything. That's just a series of events, and over a huge period of time. So the only way I can do that is to, in the first instance, structure it so classically that it becomes almost embarrassing, but it's a formula. And one of the tricks I sometimes use is I go, I can't believe I'm telling you this. Sometimes I ask, if this was a Pixar movie, what would that be? If it was like so classically structured, or like a Disney, what if it was Beauty and the Beast? What's the moment if Rupert Murdoch was Belle and he comes out and he tells the audience what he wants in his song as he wanders around the village? What would that feel like? And then I sort of draw it, the satisfying conclusion, the climax, the crisis of conscience, the resolution, are structured into those 5 acts. And then I hope, I maybe don't always, but then I hope I then can disrupt that a little bit to my own satisfaction. But I just start really traditionally.
That's brilliant. That's so interesting. Actually, it's interesting how you're right. We seem to be in this post-narrative world, but it's interesting how many of the playwrights I've been interviewing who have talked a lot about how much they love story. Um,
Sure.
but I'm going to come back to the planning thing in a second because that structural plan is really interesting. But I presume research must play a huge part in your development process. I mean, could you talk about your approach to research? In a sense, I know it's an obvious question, but kind of why do it? What does it actually add to the play?
Huh, I've never thought of that. It 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 cheats the light bulb moment. You don't have to use you don't have to worry about sitting looking out the window for a week and hope that inspiration will strike. You just go and speak to somebody and they tell you what it is, and you go, great, thanks. I get so many scene ideas, character ideas, dialogue ideas from talking to people.
Yeah.
And it also, like, on a personal level, it's just an absolute privilege and an absolute joy to be, and it's nothing to do with my own ability to do it. It is surprising to me, and I'm eternally grateful, how easy it is to write a letter to the Chancellor of the Exchequer or a newspaper editor and say, I'm writing a play about it. Do you want to meet? And they go, yeah. And that's not because they know who I am or they've seen any of my work. Sometimes it is, fortunately, but often it's not. That I was doing when I was starting out 10 years ago, I was surprised by that. People are surprised that you care and you think this story, that possibly there's a bit of vanity in there, that they think they're going to be a character in a thing, and that means significance. But yeah, it's a joy. It's just a joy to meet people, police officers, nurses, politicians. Dominic Cummings, to be in his living room when he, and this is the power. This is why we should celebrate and champion the power of drama to involve itself at the table of world events. You've got journalists and you've got the media, and I struggled a bit when Brexit came out to justify it to a lot of people who were going, "Why now? What are you doing? What can a story add to our understanding of what's happening?" And I get the anxiety around it, but the fact is, and again, I don't mean to sound like I'm celebrating my ability to do it, but the fact is, Dominic Cummings hadn't done any interviews and he hadn't appeared before a select committee, but for whatever reason, he allowed a playwright into his living room, and an actor into his living room, and just talk to us. And I know there are people who perhaps think I was too easy on Dominic Cummings, but it goes back to another thing I try and do, which is, I think the best way to prosecute somebody is to first give them a defense. So you have to go through that queasy bit where they're telling you what they think they're doing, and you have to listen. And I don't mind making you listen, to be honest. I don't care about that. And then you prosecute them, but based on what they've said, not what that you're imagining they are saying. So that's a diversion. But yes, it's I think the most fun meeting I've ever had was. Sorry, I know I'm bouncing around everywhere, but this house again, which was about whips in the 1970s, and some of them are just about alive. And it took such a long time, and that was nearly 10 years ago, so I was still learning a lot how to do this. The whips have a code of silence. They don't publish novels or memoirs. They don't do interviews. They're not even allowed to ask questions in the House of Commons. So they're these mysterious figures. The only person to ever really publish a book about it was Giles Brandreth. When he left the Whip's office, and on the day of publication, I love this story. On the day of publication, he received a card in the post with just a little black spot on it, and that was the Whip's sign to say you're out. So I thought, how the hell am I going to get him to talk to me? And I think it was the good fortune of it being long enough ago, the 70s, that they were happy. They started to feel like they could talk to me. But I was trying to get to Walter Harrison. He's one of the greatest whips of all time. He's the guy that Tony Blair said he was the only person that made him terrified. He's this Yorkshire bruiser who even Margaret Thatcher was really scared of. But I just couldn't I couldn't find him. But I started to find all the whips around him. Eventually, it felt like a helter skelter where you're trying to get to the middle of it. And eventually I found myself in his living room in Wakefield. This terrifying, beautifully terrifying man who was very warm, and he just got a box out of all his stuff. And the smell of the 70s just hit me in the face, the smoke. And and he just started telling me things, and some things that he hadn't told people before about because of the code of secrecy. And I don't know why that one I'm mentioning it, sorry, but it was a feeling of being sat with my notepad in this room in Wakefield, knowing that I got there, knowing that there was a story, and just being really excited about sharing it in a year's time with an audience at the National Theatre. That it's such a buzz.
I mean, why I think that's such a brilliant story is because, in a sense, that's exactly what I was asking. The research isn't, obviously it is to some extent, lining up your facts, checking what the real story is so you can make intelligent decisions about where to depart from it and so on. But it's also sometimes a sensuous hit. You know, as you say, the smell of the 70s is a kind of bit of research you can't do entirely imaginatively.
Yeah. So yeah, some of it's just because why wouldn't you? That human satisfaction. The way I got into, they don't let people into the Whip's office, but there was a brief moment when my constituency MP was the chief whip, and so I wrote to him saying, I'm in your constituency, can I have a meeting? And he said yes, and I said, can it be in London? So he said yes. So he invited me in as a constituent, and it was like felt like a spy with a camera in my eyes. I just like taking photos of everything I possibly could because I couldn't believe I got in the Whip's office. And then he kind of sniffed out because I actually had no questions really to ask him. But yeah, there's just a satisfaction, and often you don't know what you're going to get out of it. You don't. I think that the most important thing for me, if I was to be arrogant enough to offer a tip, is I think you can't go in there hoping that they confirm something that you want to be true. Partly because what's the point? Also because people sniff that out. I think they sniff out insincerity. I think if you just go in and you want to listen and be open to the new things that are possibly very inconvenient, I mean, you have to immediately go home and delete half your play.
Yeah.
But you just have to sit there and absorb it, and you'll get more out of it if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Can I ask, go back to thinking about the development kind of process? It's a very kind of banal question, really, but you know, in the span from kind of really committing to I am going to be writing a play about this to finishing the play, are you kind of writing a bit every day, or do you tend to build up to a point and then you write it in an intense burst at the end?
Yeah, being based in real life means that you get like a glorious first 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of research, which is normally the tormenting time when you're trying to let it brew and generate ideas. So it makes you feel active, and it makes you think about the story and the structure and the characters and the theme, but in a safe way, because you've got something physically, you've got something to do. You're often on a bus or a tube most of those weeks, going to meet people. But then when I feel like I've got enough, I will start writing, because it's too impossible to resist when you're in that world and you're completely absorbed in a particular world. But then the research side never stops then, because you start writing, you go, oh, I don't know that. I actually don't know whether all the Whips have their own phone or it's only one phone. I don't actually know where they go for lunch. Oh, it's fine, I'll park that. And you assemble new things to discover. And it never, you know, the joy of theatre, of course, is that you then have a rehearsal room for 4 weeks, and you get to invite people in and suddenly discover new stuff. Or the actor will go home, read the biography that you thought you should read, but you didn't. And they go, did you know that actually she was married to this guy first? And they take ownership of the research too. So it never really stops. I'm trying to think of, there's one play where even in previews somebody came to watch it, and they came backstage and told us something, and I rewrote something for the opening night, but I can't remember what that was. I'll try and think of it. But so that's it. So that it never stops. Like with Millionaire, the play itself became a vessel to absorb new research for the TV drama.
Yeah, right. And so that sounds to me like when you write a play, you're not writing it chronologically in the sense that you write scene 1 first, then scene 2. You are writing bits and pieces, and sort of slowly it's organically assembling as a whole. Is that right?
A bit. No, I will write ideas for I'll write ideas for scenes out of chronological order. But when I start writing, I'll start with that act one, scene one.
Right.
And, yeah, I will. I don't really actually know another way to do it except to, because you're often narrative based, because you're often so plotty, and the whole experience is cause and effect. I feel like you have to do it in a chronological order in a way.
So, and you mentioned that you might even draw out a kind of diagram of a 5-act structure for the play with the various sort of kind of turning points that you might want to be hitting. Is there more structuring than that, or what do you have before you start writing Act 1, Scene 1?
I do sort of do a weird graph. Is it a graph? Like a
Chart kind, yeah.
Yeah, of peaks, troughs, resolution, 5-act stuff, which I will try and get out of the traditional format of. I do, like a lot of writers, I was lucky enough to be accepted onto all of those great programs at the Royal Court with Simon Stevens, who helped me so much. Got to meet Stephen Jeffries, the best dramaturg in the history of the world. And all of those questions I took from them that it's sometimes helpful to ask in advance. So I do the 3 questions. I do, and I write them down. Then I think about the answer. Then I write the answer. I do ask, what do they want? What's stopping them from getting it? What do they do to get it? Mm-hmm. What does Rupert Murdoch want? What's stopping him? So what does he do about it? Then I do a second section, which is that's what he thinks he wants. But what does he actually want? He wants the Sun to be the most popular in the world. What does he actually want? He actually wants everybody to like him. But nobody ever will. So he's just going to burn it all down. But he doesn't know. He doesn't know that he doesn't know that. So I do conscious wants, unconscious wants. I just ask loads of questions, and the answer might change in the writing, but I feel like that's a helpful way to start.
And another banal factual question: do you write or type?
I write notes by hand. And I ask those questions by hand, scribble, and then I type. I type screenplays on Final Draft, which is software that they bully you to write or buy. It's like 300 quid. It's stupid. Never buy it. Make them pay for it. And then I write plays on Word. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Word is Final Draft is incredibly structured. Where you have to put things, and it does it for you. Where play should feel like you're dancing around the page, and I don't double space, because that feels like there's more space than words. But I do 1.5, and I'm flirting. I've been flirting in the past few years with Baskerville 12, and I bold my characters' names. I don't know. I think I've seen your play. You capitalize your characters, don't you?
I think I do. Yeah, that's right. That's because I'm using Courier at the moment.
Oh, man.
I know, but see, I think it's because I'm keeping it real. It's basically Courier is kind of street.
I'm very establishment. My Baskerville font is the Methuen font of their play scripts. So I'm basically a douchebag who's already publishing it for them in their own typeset.
This is a great question. I need to ask playwrights what font they use. In fact, sometimes when I teach playwriting, because I sort of that find your voice thing, I find a little bit of a misleading kind of metaphor. I have sometimes to ask students to find their font, because I think sometimes you go, actually, yeah, that's what I want my plays to look like.
Love that. I think that's great. I hate find your voice. I also hate you got to write about what you know, and I just think, well, I don't write about my single experience. That's not fun. And also, without again sounding arrogant, this is for everybody. People say, well, you're not a nuclear physicist. And I say, no, but give me a second and I'll go and meet one, and they'll tell me, and then I'll know it. So I just think, write about what you know. It's stupid.
Can I ask you about rewriting? Because I think this is one of the things that a lot of playwrights, certainly when you start out, you know how to write a play, you don't know how to rewrite a play. You will have had lots of experience of doing it, it's not quite working, having to take it apart again and rewrite it. Can you say anything about what you've kind of learnt about that and how that works for you?
Yeah, I think probably most of your writers have said this, but it's the cliche that writing is rewriting, and I really believe in it. And I don't know any other way. I feel like it's a truth hidden in plain sight. That I think the only reason why the majority of people aren't writers or say they can't write is because they started writing a first draft and it was terrible, so they stopped. And the 0.006% of the population who are playwrights are the people who carried on and humiliated themselves and felt that shame. And I know of no way how to start except just to accept that it's going to be horrible. It's going to be bad. I sort of visualize it like it's a corridor that I just have to charge down with all my stuff. And I am going to drop some stuff, and I actually might weirdly pick up some stuff on the way. But what I'm not going to do is stop, and I'm not going to go back. I'm going to get to the end, and I'm going to accept that that was awful, and no one will ever see that. And then I'll go and start again. But at least you've got something, and it's embarrassing, but you can just start shaping it. And it's you discover it in the writing. So yes, I ask all those questions, but you get to the end and you go, oh God, it's about love. I thought it was about hate. Oh, okay. So fine, sorry, start again. You do that, and I think, and then the horror turns into just joy because you have all your people, you have all your stuff, and you just go again, and you feel safe because you've got a life after. You weren't just swimming. It's yeah, I absolutely love it. And then I probably will then redo the graph and go, that's the decision she needs to make, not that decision. And those are the consequences. And why isn't she in the room when he's doing that? That makes no sense. That stuff.
Yeah. And that's great. And that dash down the corridor draft, would that be quite a quick process? I mean, would that be a matter of days? Or yeah.
No, not days, but maybe a week or a week and a half.
Right.
There may be bits missing that I've skipped over that I know I have to write. But yeah, I think it will be quick. The one time it wasn't quick was this house. I think I just felt so overwhelmed by the amount of information, the amount of legislation about dockyard improvements, and you just have all this stuff going. I can't even see the corridor. It's just cluttered with stuff. So that felt harder. But no, generally speaking, these days, yeah, I try and charge through it.
And so you've been writing for 10, 15 years, actually, something like that. What have you learnt? What can you do now? What can you say with some confidence? You know what? I actually am. I know how to do this. 15 years ago, I probably would have blundered into that. I'm now a bit more aware.
Oh my God, yeah.
I love that every playwright I've asked this question, there is a look of complete panic on their face, which basically is saying, I know nothing. I literally know how to do nothing.
Yeah. Or what you're asking me to do is say that I know something, and that's even more terrifying. Okay, this isn't a very sexy or exciting answer, but I think I know how to lead. My first plays were, as you say, about 15 years ago at the Finborough Theatre. I stayed at the Finborough writing plays for like 5 years, unpaid, doing other jobs. But it was a great privilege to be able to do that, to be able to sort of learn playwriting by writing plays in a relatively safe way whilst doing other jobs. You get the reviews, but you don't get too much attention. It's not that big bangy, splashy debut at the Royal Court or the National. You get to sort of quietly try and learn your craft a bit. I think, but what I struggled with then was the research actually, and how you dance lightly through it rather than feel weighed down by it. And I feel a bit like I can maybe know how to park the research and dance lightly into the script without carrying all that so heavily with me. But audiences may disagree, but that's what I feel.
Thank you. Can I ask about Ink a bit more specifically? did you absolutely initiate that idea, or was the idea brought to you at all?
No, again, it was an absolute good fortune. I think I was looking at something else, and I clicked on the right website at the right time and read this story about the first ever editor and the first ever year in the life of that newspaper. So I took that to actually no, I'm myth making, like the themes of Quiz or Memories Are a Lie. Didn't start as a play. I was about to say that I pitched it to Channel 4 as a television drama when I was way too early in my career for that to be even conceivable, that you would give me a single drama or a television series about the sun. They said no, and then I left that for about 4 or 5 years, and then I started to think, I think it's a play. So I took it to Headlong when Rupert Gould was there, and then it took me a while to get to it because of, I think I was doing another thing, and so then he was at the Almeida. But then so that's how it evolved. But yes, it was me taking them the story.
And obviously there's a lot of research involved in the creation of Ink. What do you have in your head, a kind of sense of what your wiggle room is? So just to pick a tiny example, in the first scene, I think it's the first scene of Ink, Rupert Murdoch orders an incredibly rare steak. Do you feel you need to know that Rupert Murdoch actually does like very rare steak? Or do you go, no, I'm going to there are some basic building blocks, but I'm allowed to fictionalize?
Well, okay, with that specific example, I can have my cake and eat it. I can have my steak and eat it, sorry. Because here's what I know. History has recorded for me that they ate lobster at that meeting. Okay. So I'm going to satisfy the truthists by giving them that. That allows me to make up this joke, basically. It's a gag where he orders steak, but he wants it so rare that it only looks at the flame from across the kitchen. So I think that I can do both for that reason. But as a general principle, no, I'm not really like fundamentalist about that. I don't. Like, if it bothers the real life people, there was an example, I think, once when we had a character smoking and their daughter came to see it, and he said that not only did he not smoke, he really hated smoking. And then you have a choice to make. Do I go, well, morally, I don't need to be upset about that. So I probably will change it, but does it matter? And I think it's a case-by-case basis for me.
I just think of a really interesting example of this. It's not one of your plays, but when Peter Morgan wrote The Deal, which is the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown thing, and it culminates famously in the famous meeting in Granita, where they agreed the deal between them, which they both then had completely different memories of. And in Peter Morgan's script, I think Tony Blair has a salad or something, and Gordon Brown sits there with a glass of water. And apparently they both had a meal. But what's interesting to me is that it feels actually more truthful to say that the austere Presbyterian, rather dour Gordon Brown would sit there with a glass of water. There's something there about where fictionalizing might actually be more truthful.
Totally agree. And an audience is sophisticated enough to know that. They know that David Morrissey isn't Gordon Brown. And so that's a start. And then from there on, then you're declaring that it's conceited and contrived. I totally agree with you about all you can do is capture the essence of truth. And sometimes to do that, when you're constrained on time and everything else, you have to signpost using alternative symbols. So a glass of water does the work for you, even though it's not technically true. At the beginning of Quiz on TV, we had a card, which is one of my favorite quotes, and also a useful get out clause, which is Pablo Picasso: "Art is not truth, art is a lie that helps us realize truth." And even that gloriously is sort of the wrong quote. On the graphic, they put a full stop at the end of that, and it actually goes on for quite a long time. So even that quote is a lie, I'm afraid. But I think it's that, yes, you are trying to capture the essence of somebody's character, but of course you're not going to have all the details. And sometimes you might have to change the details to clear the essence in a short period of time.
Do you have to run? I imagine you do. Do you have to theatres run your scripts by a libel lawyer?
Yes, God, yeah. And actually, I'm so grateful for that, because they'll find them, they'll pay them, and they'll just tell you. I think sometimes I think I've made this up, but I think it's basically like a traffic light system where it's green, amber, red, and they'll go green, green. Yes, you can say that. Yes, Rupert Murdoch can order a steak when he didn't order a steak. Amber, ooh, okay. If you have to say it, but can you find two sources that back that up? Red basically is, if you say this, I can't help you, and you're going to go to jail. And I'm not trying to sound heroic, but the joy of getting a script which is all red, you go, so something exciting is clearly happening here. And that happened. I did a play with Josie Rourke at the Donmar called Privacy.
Yeah.
And the most extraordinary thing happened one day, because we were very fortunate enough to be in possession, or to have a good relationship with The Guardian, who were the people who had all the files leaked to them by Edward Snowden. Again, we just asked to speak to them, and eventually you find yourself in the editor's office, and you're talking to the people who looked at the files and stole the files. And so we just had really good access, to the point where by the time we got to New York, we found Edward Snowden, the most wanted man in the world, and we got him. And we asked him, we could only ask him one question, and we were panicking because we had about 10 minutes. So we were in a cafe going, I think we should just ask him to read a scene up to camera, like he's acting with Daniel Radcliffe. Maybe let's try that. So we sent him the script, and he agreed to do it. But we got to talk to him and interview him on video. And you have these ludicrous questions which nobody knows how to answer. So we sat in the director's office of the theatre, and everyone's trying to work out if it's a federal criminal offence to use the Wi-Fi signal of the theatre to pipe in the most wanted man in the world. Do we need to get a different Wi-Fi signal? Do we need to not be in the theatre when we're doing it? And nobody knows the answer to those questions. And so you just have to take a calculated risk. The one that happened in the London show was there were two, Edward Snowden leaked these GCHQ slides. There was like a PowerPoint presentation of how agents should manipulate their targets using various different things. And we were in previews. I think this is okay to be saying. We were in previews. Josie Watt will be able to confirm it. And we hadn't necessarily realized that two of the slides had been published in America, but they'd never been published in the UK on a UK website. So you have a panic meeting at, I think it was like 6:50 before we were going up at 7:30 with a brilliant lawyer who had mobilized to help us. But we had a really dicey conversation where we had to work out whether projecting a slide onto a theatre wall is publishing. And is that a crime? And your heart's going, and of course the truth is nobody actually knows that. That's a question you can't answer, so you have to take a calculated risk based on precedent. And again, as long as this doesn't sound heroic or arrogant, I took it very seriously and was a bit scared and also a bit excited. Obviously, I'm a human being. I think you have to sometimes hope that it's a really bad look to arrest playwrights and directors. And again, I don't mean that cavalier. I mean it quite seriously. I think we have a pass that we should use, and I think we have chips that we should spend. And if we can't, then no one can. And I think you just have to trust that. But yeah, again, we talked a lot about whether the First Amendment in America, when that protects journalists, we didn't know whether it extended to playwrights and actors, and whether that, in terms of some of the things we were talking about, in terms of working with people and sensitive material, we just didn't know whether we were protected or not. But I think you have a responsibility to push that quite far if you can.
That is extraordinary. And did were you concerned at all about Rupert Murdoch suing over his representation in Ink?
Yeah.
Did anything
Yeah.
have to change after?
No. We did. Yes, sorry, I did. Yes. There were probably things that the lawyers came back with and advised, and you just don't be a dick about it. You just go fine. Because actually, the thing you also have to accept is sometimes it's sometimes you're culpable, but sometimes it's the theatre that's culpable. And theatre has staff and has people who didn't ask to be involved in your stupid play about Murdoch. So yes. you change things because of that. The Murdoch thing's really interesting. Maybe it's not interesting, but I can't remember if you saw it. Yes, you saw it. It was, again, it's a fun and I think a important exercise to try and get people to question their perceptions about something. But I get that becomes quite icky, possibly even reckless and stupid when it comes to someone like Murdoch or something like a newspaper like that, which understandably provokes a lot of reactions. But I know no other way of interrogating it rather than at first, as I say, asking the question, well, look, I know you don't like it, but it's a valid question to go, what about it? It really appeals to the most readership in the country. So this is a long way around of saying, look, I'm aware that there's a different play here that someone could write that really, really puts him in the stocks and throws those vegetables, and that can feel really satisfying, and somebody should write that play. I'm aware that we gave him there was, people always joked that they came out of the first act really enjoying the Sun and really liking Rupert Murdoch, and how could you? I think bar sales went up at the Almeida that time. But that's the point. The proposition is to go, you think this, what if you don't? Oh, actually, don't worry. In the second act, we're going to really go for him. It's fine. But I do wrestle with that. I don't love that feeling of, the Sun has, we all know the problems of the Sun. It targets minority and vulnerable groups, and it has had a toxic effect on our political discourse. Unforgivable things with one particular city in the north of England. It's also those guys are really talented. They're good at what they do, and I don't like it. I don't read it, but there's a skill there. So I think you can balance. I think those two things can both be true, and they both exist. This is a long way of me getting around to the fact that it's a confusing feeling having Rupert Murdoch come and watch your play about him, but he did twice. He saw it in the West End, and then he saw it on Broadway. And there was this moment actually on Broadway where he came out, and I think the New York Times had got wind that he was in, and they asked him what he thought. And I don't know why, I don't know, I have no access to his thoughts, but he said, I didn't have a problem with it, which was an unhelpful thing in regards to understandably that provoking a reaction amongst the theatre community, and I totally get it. But here's my hopefully not too long-winded argument about that. That will be as pompous as you would imagine. I am pleased that we managed as a team to create a play that made Sun readers or Fox News viewers feel safe enough to come in, not just the Guardian readers and not just the left wing. So they could sit there and they could get their justification delivered to them. But it gives me satisfaction that Rupert Murdoch got to sit there and to be told a story about how he became the most successful newspaper owner in the world, which he liked. And then he had to then sit there and listen to people go, you've poisoned the conversation and you've destroyed the news industry. And what you've done has had a negative impact on people's lives. I'm not saying that I'm proud of that. I'm saying that was the deliberate choice to write the play that he could come and see, and then listen to the criticism. But I get why other people go, what the hell are you doing? That's incredibly irresponsible. You're puffing these people up. And I wrestle with it all the time. I don't necessarily think I get the balance right, but that's the just attempt.
I mean, I think it's interesting in terms of the two halves of Ink. Actually, before I say that, do you know this goes back to the libel thing. Do you know the story of when Howard Brenton and David Hare wrote Pravda for the National Theatre was it 1985? I think that play was out, and Pravda is, I guess, a kind of thinly veiled play about Rupert Murdoch taking over the Times, actually, at that point. But it isn't Rupert Murdoch, it's Lambert LaRue, and he's South African, not Australian. And apparently they said, they said to the National Theatres, they gave the script to the National Theatres lawyers, and they came back saying, what you have, Lambert LaRue is a bully. He's violent, he's lecherous, he's foul-mouthed, he's completely immoral. If Rupert Murdoch wants to say, I saw that play and I recognize myself in Lambert LaRue, good luck to him. And that apparently was their response, which I think is great. But what I wanted to ask about the two-act structure, because I think this is actually something quite characteristic of your work, which is a sort of kind of slightly dialectical thing between the two halves of a lot of your plays. So Quiz, for example, tells us one story about Charles Ingram in the first act. I'm talking about the stage version now. And then the second act tells us a quite different story, and we have to coordinate the two. I think The Angry Brigade does that in a different way. Labour of Love does that in a different way, and Ink does that too. So exactly as you say, that I came out of the first act going, I have never felt more positive towards Rupert Murdoch in my entire life, and then the second act really, really complicates that in an interesting way. How far is the planning of the interval a key part of how you conceive the plays?
I love an interval. And I'm aware that makes me very unfashionable, but I just think intervals are great. I love the best interval, I think. The two best intervals in the canon. I think Othello is pretty damn good, where not that we know that's where he wanted the interval, but basically the most remarkable scene, I think, in Shakespeare, which is like one of the longest, where the conversation happens in real time for about 10 minutes, where the last... Is it what? The handkerchief. I forget if the handkerchief is in it, but it's the one. It's basically at the beginning of the last scene before most productions choose to put their interval. I don't know what the scene number is. The meeting starts where Iago comes in, and Othello, at that moment in his time, loves his wife, and everything's fine. 10 minutes later, by the end of that, they're on the ground, clasping their hands and saying, "We're going to kill her." And the lights come down. And it's remarkable for all the reasons that are self-evident. But I also love an interval where the audience goes, "Oh, that's what it's about." I find that really satisfying. Then you go and get your drink, and then you come back, and you now know the deal, and it's been signposted what the next experience is going to be. I loved August Osage County, where I think that probably had two intervals, but I think the second one is just a glorious ramshackle story of all these brilliant women who go home after their dad goes missing. But you don't really know who you're following, but you're following this wonderful mother character who's doped up on drugs and drinking and swearing, and she's a transgressor. And every great play needs a transgressor. And the sisters are all trying to work out what to do with it and how to do it. And I think that the moment before the second interval is absolutely glorious. The mother says something so outrageous that the sisters explode in rage, and it bursts into, they're chasing the mother around the house, and I think they pin her down on the ground at some point. And then one of the sisters stands up and just screams, "I'm in charge now," and the lights go down, and you go, right, okay, I get it, okay, because you didn't actually also really know who you were following. And then Tracy Letts just goes, as this person, they're going to shout it at you. "I'm in charge now." I probably really paraphrased that, and I probably really invented in my head what I think it is. But it's a long way of saying I love an interval, and I think where to strategically place it is just very, very helpful. So yeah, I do. Yeah, that's planning stage. That's before script writing stage, because you need to know where that is so you can do that. And it's when you have like a formal device that you're running at the same time as a story. So with Labour of Love, the first half starts at the last election and goes back in time, and then the second half boomerangs back, and you see it from a different perspective. That you have those considerations as well. But I hadn't actually been as conscious until you said it that it was a and now you've made me conscious of it, you probably killed it. But
and on that bombshell, thank you so much for your time. That was completely fascinating, absolutely brilliant. And I look forward to bumping into you somewhere on the streets around here when all of this
is over. Here's when that great day comes. But thank you. It's been so nice to talk. Just nice to talk, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much. Cheers.